Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. You guys have sent in some really fascinating stuff for us to dig into. And, well, our goal here is pretty straightforward to take a deep dive into it with you, pull out the key insights, and hopefully you'll walk away with a clearer understanding.
Right? Like we're your companions for navigating these often pretty complex or unusual sources, helping you figure out what's most important.
Yeah, absolutely. And today we're tackling something truly intriguing. It's a YouTube transcript of a hypnosis regression session.
Okay.
The title, translated from Polish, is 258-PLM in an artificial womb incubator regression hypnosis Ewelina Jackowska Team Grifasi from the Ewelina Jackowska Hypnosis Team Grifasi channel. Artificial wombs and incubators, I mean, that right there, that's a pretty vivid picture, wouldn't you say?
Definitely sets the stage, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And for you listening, the main point of this deep dive is to try to make sense of the information revealed during this regression session, specifically concerning your subject, who's referred to as Monika in this transcript. So we're here to kind of guide you through this really remarkable journey.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's dive into this thing, huh? So the session starts with Monika already under hypnosis. And right off the bat, the initial observations, they're pretty wild.
Yeah.
She's lying on her side in an enclosed space, almost like a bubble. And that's bubble, they describe it as being co-created, meaning it wasn't just like spontaneously there.
Interesting.
And this bubble, it's not alone. There are lots of them. They're situated on, get this, they call it a ship or some kind of structure near Earth.
Wow.
It's resting on a gently rotating platform.
Okay, so right away we've got this sense of a constructed reality. This isn't just some natural setting. It's been designed. And the fact that there are multiple bubbles on this larger structure, well, that kind of suggests a system, maybe even a collective of some sort.
Yeah, it definitely does. Now, within Monica's bubble, her immediate surroundings, they're very peculiar. Picture a wine glass-like structure, okay?
Okay.
It's enclosed by something that looks like glass, and it's connected to this mechanism. They describe it as having cables, which suggests some kind of energy source or flow.
Right.
When entering this contained area, the first sensation is emptiness, but then it quickly changes, shifts to a rubbery or a plasmatic substance that feels like it's enveloping.
So we're getting a very sensory description here. This shift from emptiness to this physical substance that feels like it's sticking to her or surrounding her, it suggests that someone or something is deliberately shaping Monica's senses within this environment.
Yeah, definitely. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Monica is completely absorbed in reading documents or maybe a book. It's not totally clear, but she's so focused on it that she's totally unaware of anything else going on. They even try to interact with her or get her attention away from what she's reading, but she resists it. It's like she's in her own little world within this already isolated space.
It sounds like she's in a really deep hypnotic state, as the transcript suggests at least. But it makes you wonder, what could she possibly be reading that's got her so captivated?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Now, even in this deep hypnotic state, they identify a point of contact. And this is surprising. It's her eyes.
Huh.
Apparently, even though there are what they call overlays on her eyes, they are the least hypnotized part of what's called her subtle body.
Okay, for clarity, when we say subtle body, what we're talking about is her energetic or spiritual self, okay? Separate from her physical form. It's a concept you'll find in a lot of esoteric traditions.
Yeah, exactly.
Go on.
So they make initial contact telepathically, but the immediate sensation is one of being scared. And this leads to an assertion of untouchable, and the focus is solely on Monica's subtle body, almost like, setting boundaries before they go any further.
This feeling of being scanned could suggest a monitoring system of some sort, right? And then that statement, untouchable, well, that establishes a kind of safe zone for the regression to happen, to prevent anything external from interfering.
Yeah, makes sense. Now comes the breakthrough. The hypnotist, they describe it as energetically slipping under these overlays on Monica's eyes. And this leads to recognition, a dawning understanding of what's happening. And then a huge emotional release from Monica. Tears and this feeling of deep loneliness and rejection. But also surprise, like she's surprised to sense a friendly presence.
This kind of emotional release, it's pretty common in regression work. It's like when those deeply held feelings finally start to surface, and that contrast, the loneliness and then that unexpected friendly presence, it really highlights her emotional state within this whole artificial setup.
Yeah, absolutely. And crucially, at this point, Monica gives permission to work on these feelings during the session.
That consent that's key in this kind of process, it gives them permission to really examine these emotions and hopefully help her resolve them.
Exactly. So after this, Monica's still kind of unaware of her surroundings besides what she's reading. But then her awareness shifts. She starts observing her environment through that wine glass structure we talked about. And what does she see? She sees platforms, tons of them, each one holding like subtle bodies.
Hmm.
And these spaces, it's like they're prepared. They estimate around 30 platforms, all arranged in a circle.
So her awareness is expanding, right? The hypnosis is allowing her to perceive more of the reality of this whole situation. It's not just her in this book anymore.
Right, exactly. And get this, in the center of this circle of platforms, there's a computer system.
Okay.
And it's connected to all those spaces holding the subtle bodies. And they directly compare it to an incubator, the kind that maintains things like temperature for a baby.
That incubator analogy, that's really revealing. It reinforces this idea of a controlled and maintained environment. Like those subtle bodies are being kept in a very specific state for a reason.
Yeah. Now, we learn a bit more about Monica's environment. It's characterized by this dense frequency, which they compare to anesthesia, and that's preventing her from seeing clearly. This is the hypnotization they mentioned at the beginning.
Okay, so that anesthesia-like frequency, that's the mechanism that's putting her in this hypnotic state. It's intentionally limiting her awareness of what's really going on.
Right, and that rubbery substance we talked about, that's what's creating the state, apparently. It's dense, but soft to the touch, and it creates this feeling of connection rather than separation, which seems to be contributing to Monica's kind of lowered and slowed down energy state within the bubble.
It's almost like they're deliberately engineering a sensory experience to keep Monika in a passive and unaware state.
Yeah, like that fetus in the womb analogy keeps coming up.
It does.
They say the interior of Monica's space is tight but comfortable. And again, they compare it to the womb. It's like the tightness was created in her mind for comfort, to give her this feeling of being cared for.
That womb imagery is pretty powerful. It points to a desire for safety and security. But what about that book?
Right, so let's get to the content of this book. It turns out it's the story of Monica's life. But here's the thing. She doesn't actually understand it.
What do you mean?
She's just passively observing it, like looking at beautiful writing on a tablet, but not really grasping the meaning of the words.
So she's reading about her own life, but in a detached way. There's no real emotional connection.
Yeah, exactly. And it's confirmed that this written history, it lines up with information accessible from her DNA about her experiences. So it's not just random information, it's accurate. It's really a record of her entire life journey.
So they're basically saying it's real. Her life story is laid out in front of her, but something's stopping her from truly understanding it.
Yes, and what's stopping her is the artificially created space itself. The very environment she's in is preventing her from truly engaging with her own history.
That's messed up. Why even bother creating a record of her life if you're just going to keep her from understanding it? What's the point?
Well, that's a question we're going to have to grapple with. Interestingly, though, Monika expresses a desire to read and understand what they call the contracts fully, even though at first she doesn't feel any urgency about it, like she thinks she already understands them.
So there's this disconnect between her perceived understanding and the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and that's something a lot of us can probably relate to, right? Thinking we've got it all figured out when maybe we don't.
Definitely.
Okay, so they start this experiment where she reads the contracts with full comprehension, and that leads to a big ID revelation. There are 33 contracts.
33.
33 contracts dealing with all kinds of stuff. Past life oaths sworn in blood, a repeating encounter with a man from another lifetime, feelings of abandonment and rejection, a memory of herself as a 5-year-old girl with a detached female figure, a general sense of loneliness.
That's a lot to unpack. It suggests that there are all these deep-rooted emotional and relational patterns spanning across multiple lifetimes. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, are there any themes that keep popping up in your own life?
All the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so they keep digging. And they identify a really core emotional contract. It's described as this feeling of neurosis or deeply hidden emotions that she avoids dealing with. And they're revealed to be unexpressed anger, misunderstanding, and resentment, all directed towards a woman.
Wow. I mean, unexpressed negative emotions like that, they can have a huge impact on your well-being, often manifesting in all sorts of ways, mentally, emotionally, even physically.
Absolutely. Now, they clarify that these contracts are not just from past life, they relate to her current life too. Like, her current life is basically a continuation of commitments made before.
Okay, so this interconnectedness between lifetimes, it's saying that unresolved issues and commitments can carry over. They can influence your current experiences, your relationships, Everything.
Yeah. And the contract related to meeting a man, they link it to Monica's current relationship with her husband, who she felt was, and this is a quote, her savior when they met.
Interesting.
Like he transformed her life.
So you can see how these past contracts can show up in your present relationships, sometimes in really unexpected ways. And that whole idea of being saved, it kind of hints at this dependency dynamic too, right?
Right. And they explore that further. They talk about this perceived dependency in their relationship. And they suggest that Monica might fall apart if he left. They link this back to that blood oath we talked about and the feeling that he was involved in it somehow.
That's heavy stuff. I mean, the idea of falling apart if your partner leaves, it definitely points to an unhealthy level of reliance.
Yeah. And it makes you think about the dynamics in your own relationships, right? The level of interdependence and how healthy it is.
Yeah, definitely.
So Monitor's reaction to all of this, to finally understanding these contracts, it's kind of surprising. At first, she doesn't believe it.
Really?
She thinks it's nonsense. And the book even looks different to her now, like it's just blank pages. But despite that, she still feels a kind of inner peace, and they attribute that to the influence of the womb environment.
It's almost like that artificial environment is suppressing her true reactions. Keeping her in this state of false calm, even though she's facing some pretty intense information about her life.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And they keep emphasizing the influence of those overlays on her eyes. They're playing a huge role in how she processes all of this information, like filters, distorting her perception and preventing her from really understanding her situation. Monica describes her environment as this beautiful, artificially created scene that gives her comfort and pleasure, but this is only when she's seeing it through those overlays. When she looks deeper from her eye level without those overlays, what she sees is her life history.
It's like she's being offered this pleasant distraction from the challenging truth. And it makes you think, how often do we do that in our own lives?
All the time.
Yeah.
We seek comfort in distractions, in things that make us feel good, even if it's at the expense of facing what we need to face. And here's another interesting point. They ask Monica to touch or even remove the overlays, and she refuses.
Why?
Because she anticipates pain, she thinks it'll hurt, and she's actually experiencing pleasure from wearing them.
So she's choosing the illusion of comfort over confronting the potential pain of reality. That's a pretty powerful image, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's something we all do in different ways, right? We avoid things that make us uncomfortable, even if it means staying stuck. So they ask her where would it hurt if she removed them, and she identifies specific locations: her head, her throat, her chest, and this persistent internal scream that she's been carrying since she was about 5 years old. They link this to all that accumulated misunderstanding, the loneliness, the unpleasant emotions, all those hidden emotions from the contracts.
Those specific locations, they often point to energetic blockages. Places where unresolved emotional experiences have kind of gotten stuck. And that internal scream from childhood sounds like a really deep wound.
And she also feels a twinge in her ovaries. They then talk about this feeling of pressure in her lower abdomen and a slowed down rhythm. They say it could be affecting her reproductive organs, her sexual energy, maybe even causing nausea and hormonal imbalances.
So it's not just emotional or energetic, it's manifesting physically too.
Right. And they find something else on her subtle body, something on her fingers that resonates when she turns the pages of the book.
Wait, what?
And this is messed up because it gives her this false sense of control. Because of those overlays, she feels like she's the one in control of her story, the creator of her experience within this artificial space. Completely disconnected from the reality that it's all manufactured.
Man, it's like layers upon layers of illusion here.
Yeah, it really is. Now, remember that tube and those cables we talked about earlier? They confirm that they're connected to the artificial space, not directly to Monica's body.
So it's not like a direct physical link. It's more about manipulating the environment itself, which then influences her.
Right. And the purpose of that whole setup, to maintain a consistent energy level within the space. It acts like an umbilical cord and also transmits information about her emotional state and her level of conscious understanding.
So it's a two-way street, providing energy to maintain this whole facade and extracting data about her inner world.
Yeah, exactly. Now, here's the thing. They say that no energy is being directly taken from Monica's subtle body. But they do note that she lacks self-confidence and has all these dependencies in her physical life, that whole low self-esteem thing we talked about. And they suggest that this dependency on external validation, it leads to an energetic exchange based on her emotional reactions.
So they're not directly taking her energy, but her emotional vulnerabilities are creating this indirect energy exchange.
Yeah, and that's a key point because it shows how much our insecurities, our need for external validation can impact our energetic field.
For sure.
So where's all this information going? Well, they trace it back to disks where it's being recorded in some specific code.
Disks, like computer disks.
Yeah, apparently. And get this, they look down the storage capacity as seemingly endless.
Endless. So this isn't just a small project. It suggests that they've been at this for a while and they're planning on collecting a lot of data.
And they confirm that the space itself has existed for 13 years, which lines up with the start of Monika's current life. But they also say that they're recording information from all her incarnations. Like they have access to her entire history.
Whoa.
This current life is just one data point in a much larger study. And they clarify that the conditions within Monika's space have remained consistent throughout these 13 years.
Okay, so it's like a controlled experiment. Keep the variables the same, observe the effects over time.
Right. Now, they finally identify who's conducting this research, and you're not going to believe this.
What is it?
Greys. Like the stereotypical alien greys.
Yeah, but they describe them as more muscular and slightly taller than the usual greys.
And get this, they're acting more like biorobots, with like a programmed intelligence, but just enough to solve problems in the studies.
So not necessarily super intelligent, but definitely functional, which suggests that they're being controlled by someone or something else, right?
Exactly, and they confirm that. They say the Greys are serving someone else, and that someone else is get this, a cockroach-like insectoid.
Hold on, a what? A cockroach, you're kidding, right?
I wish I was. And this isn't just some random cockroach either. It's like a boss within this whole operation. There are apparently 6 of these insectoids, each with their own specific role in the project, and one of them is specifically linked to Monika.
So it's like a whole management structure, each one specializing in a specific aspect of this whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. And they finally reveal the main focus of this whole research project, dependency, which is pretty interesting considering all of Monika's issues we talked about.
Yeah, that's no coincidence.
And the reason they're so interested in dependency is because dependent people have a strong drive to act in ways that gain attention and approval, which, according to them, produces energy. They basically see dependency as a resource that they can exploit.
It's messed up, but it makes sense. They're intentionally targeting people with these vulnerabilities.
Yeah. And what are they using this energy for? Well, for the reproduction of these insectoids, specifically to produce eggs.
Whoa. So Monika's emotional energy is basically fueling their reproductive cycle? That's intense.
Yeah, it is. Now, here's where it gets even weirder. Remember all those subtle bodies in the incubators? Well, they're observing how those subtle bodies create conditions that modify the genetic information within the insectoid eggs.
Wait, what? Like they're trying to change their DNA using human subtle bodies?
Yeah, it seems that way. They want to enhance themselves with like a controlling consciousness and invulnerability.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and here's the thing. The genetic information, they actually desire it from the human subtle bodies, but they're still just observing at this point. Like they're trying to figure out the best way to get it.
So they haven't figured it out yet, but they're working on it.
Yeah. And get this project has been going on for an estimated 3,000 Earth years.
3,000 years.
3,000 years. The current phase with Monika, they say it could last anywhere between 100 and 300 Earth years, though apparently time is perceived differently in that space.
Man, that's some long-term planning. It really shows the scale of this whole operation.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, they decide to do something pretty drastic. They halt the entire mechanism surrounding Monika.
What do you mean, like they shut it all down?
Yeah, the wine glass, the substance, the tube, the overlays, everything. And they essentially stop time for everything except Monika and her subtle body.
So it's a temporary pause, a chance for her to step outside the manipulation, to see things more clearly.
Exactly. And her reaction to this is pretty immediate. She jolts like she's been startled and then looks around with this expression of confusion and disgust.
So she doesn't like what she sees.
Nope, not one bit.
Which just goes to show how much that artificial environment was masking a much less pleasant reality.
Exactly. Now they start revealing everything to Monika, everything they've discovered, everything she's been through. And this triggers a really powerful physical reaction. She starts vomiting.
Whoa.
Like her body's purging all this negative energy. And they describe it as her own cleansing portal opening up, accelerated the process.
It's like her body's finally releasing all that toxicity, both energetic and emotional.
Right. After this, her emotional state shifts. She feels this youthful awakening, like a dawning understanding, but also anger, a lot of anger.
That anger, that's a good sign. It means she's recognizing the injustice of the situation. And that awakening, that understanding, well, that represents a huge shift towards self-awareness and empowerment.
Yeah, it definitely does. And what does she do next? She removes those deactivated overlays from her eyes and her fingers, discards them, along with all that residual hypnotizing energy, and then she emerges from the confined space.
It's like a symbolic act of taking back control, breaking free from those imposed limitations.
Yeah. And where are they now? They're outside the ship, in space, feeling the sense of levitation as subtle bodies.
So they've completely detached from the physical constraints of the ship, and their perspective has broadened. They're no longer confined to that narrow view.
Exactly. And now the real work begins. They start exploring the contracts, going back to the earliest past life events. And the first one they uncover, it's the loss of children.
The loss of children.
Yeah. And not just in one lifetime, multiple lifetimes. They describe one particularly traumatic experience where she lost 7 children.
7. Oh, my God.
Stillbirths, infant deaths, late-term miscarriages. It's suggested that it was due to environmental factors and the limited medical knowledge of the time. But they also say it was something she agreed to experience beforehand. Overall, they identify 15 incarnations that involved the loss of children.
That's a heavy recurring theme. Grief, loss, motherhood, family. It's like a karmic lesson, playing out across multiple lifetimes. It really makes you think about your own experiences. Are there any patterns like that in your life?
Yeah, I think we all have them if we look closely enough.
Right.
Okay, so the next contract, it's pretty intense. It involves Monika murdering a man she lived with in another lifetime, possibly a husband, it's not totally clear. And this act, it was committed when she felt completely disconnected from herself. She was influenced by an external force, which she identified as an angel. But the hypnotist actually perceives it as a reptilian being. This reptilian being convinced her that it was the right thing to do to end suffering.
Whoa. So she was manipulated into committing this act. It raises all sorts of questions about power, influence, and our ability to see the truth.
Yeah, and it really highlights how subjective these experiences can be, how our perception can be so easily skewed.
Absolutely.
Okay, so they move on to the blood oath contract. They describe a scene with 2 young lovers in a forest, making this vow of eternal love. They prick their fingers, exchange blood, and kiss. But they're really sad because they know they can't be together in that lifetime.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and this oak, it creates a bond that carries over across lifetimes, but it manifests in all sorts of challenging ways, like being on opposing sides in conflicts, or even a brother developing feelings for his sister.
Wow. That's a really powerful example of how our intentions can have unforeseen consequences, across time and space.
Right, and are you ready for this? They confirm that Monica's current husband is the other person from that blood oath.
No way. So their current relationship is directly tied to this ancient vow. It explains that intense connection they have.
Yeah, it definitely does. They then interpret that knife in the heart contract. They say it represents a major disappointment in this lifetime, probably from a man who either rejected her or left her.
So again, we see this theme of relationship challenges, hurt, betrayal. It seems like it's something she's dealt with across multiple lifetimes.
Right, and then there's the feelings of abandonment, rejection, loneliness. They link those to a female figure, a mother, or some kind of materning role model. And this connection exists in both her current life and a past life. And it turns out, in that past life, the woman was actually one of Monica's lost children.
Wow. So the mother figure in her current life was her child in a past life. It's like this karmic loop.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, who the people in our lives really are and what kind of connections we have with them.
Definitely makes you think.
Okay, another contract there uncover, it's the feeling of money slipping through her fingers. She describes it as gold coins just, disappearing. And this links back to a past life memory where she was a young boy with muddy feet and empty hands, couldn't even afford to buy food.
So that past life experience of poverty is probably still affecting her today, right?
Yeah.
Creating these anxieties around money and security.
Yeah, most likely. Okay, so they then trace the beginning of this whole intervention back to Monica's self-disgust about her weight and her eating habits. It got to the point where she just surrendered, stopped caring about her well-being, and they say that this low energetic state, that's what they exploited. They observed her for a while and then created that artificial womb for her.
So that moment of self-neglect, that's what made her vulnerable. It opened the door for this whole manipulation to begin.
Yeah, exactly. And they go even deeper, back to her pre-incarnation planning, like the plan she made for her life before she was born. But they say that a significant event happened when she was about 5 years old, something with that detached female figure we talked about.
Right.
And that made her even more susceptible to this whole thing. The initial plan, it apparently had multiple paths she could have taken based on her energy and self-understanding. But that childhood experience, it steered her towards the timeline she's on now.
It's like that one event derailed her whole journey.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy stuff. Okay, so next they talk about her difficulties with friendships. They say it stems from her insecurity and her lack of self-acceptance. It makes her feel unattractive, and she can't really feel safe in relationships.
That makes sense, consider all the low self-esteem issues we've talked about.
Right. And then they talk about this past friendship, a close female friend who she lost touch with. And Monika feels this intense sense of loss and regret, but they tie it back to her possessiveness in the friendship and her tendency to withdraw to avoid pain when her friend formed a close bond with someone else.
So again, we see that dependency pattern playing out, seeking her happiness externally instead of finding it within herself.
Exactly. And her relationship with her mother, they revisit that too. Remember how we talked about her energy being drained by her mother? Well, they say that when they don't talk for weeks, Monika's energy just plummets. But when they do have positive interactions, she gets a boost.
It's such a powerful, energetic tie. And that past life connection, where the mother figure was her child. It explains a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And her panic attacks at work when she has to speak publicly, they say that's not energetically rooted. It comes from a lack of inner foundation, a lack of stability in those moments.
So it's more about building her confidence, her self-reliance.
Right? And her struggles with weight loss and binge eating, they link that back to the coldness from her mother. Like she's using food to get the emotional warmth and comfort that she's not getting elsewhere.
Emotional eating is so common. It's all about finding comfort, when you're feeling empty or unfulfilled.
Absolutely. And her low libido, they say that could be connected to the aching in her ovaries, like a subconscious protection mechanism.
A protection mechanism. Against what?
Against further loss, they tie it back to those past miscarriages and stillbirths.
That's really profound. It's like her body's trying to protect her from reliving that pain.
Yeah. And then there's her son, remember? The older one who's really sensitive.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out he's mirroring her emotional state and her eating patterns.
Wow. So he's picking up on her stuff and reflecting it back to her. It's amazing how connected families are energetically.
Yeah, it really is. They say he's subconsciously compensating for her emotional deficits, like he's trying to provide the closeness that she's missing.
That's a lot for a child to carry.
It is, but at this point, Monika expresses that she's tired. She wants to change her situation.
That's a big moment. Recognizing that she needs to make a change, that she has the power to do so.
Absolutely. So they decide to go back to her very first incarnation on Earth.
Okay.
And it's not pretty. They describe it as a very unconscious arrival. Like she didn't really understand what was happening or why she was here.
That sounds like a rough start.
Yeah, it was. They say she was brought down clumsily, like it was forced, not a natural process. And this initial disorientation, it really impacted her subsequent experiences. They also confirm that even during this first lifetime, she made agreements and connections, which contributed to that whole disoriented state.
So even in those unconscious moments, we can still get caught up in these energetic webs.
Yeah, it seems that way. Okay, so now they go back to the moment before she even intended to incarnate on Earth.